And as you can imagine, having only one eye and going blind is one of my biggest fears in life, right?
Understandably.
Not being able to see. And so being wheeled out that day blind, essentially, I couldn't see for days. Welcome to the very first episode of the Like a Diamond podcast. My name is Andrew Van Noy.
And I am Kristen Van Noy, his wife.
We are so excited to be here. I can't tell you how much effort and work and also how many roadblocks there have been to just getting this show produced.
There's been a lot.
Why?
And then second guessing, is it
I know.
supposed to happen? And we just have kept pressing forward and hoping this dream is actually coming true.
I know. So, just as a hint, tons of audio visual issues, camera problems, recording problems, syncing, all things that shouldn't really be that big of a deal. And it's kind of thematic to the entire show, right? Like a diamond. How interesting is that? Right?
But why don't you tell our guests, why did we call our podcast Like a Diamond?
That is an awesome question. So I think, first of all, life is hard, right? It's just hard. It's hard for everyone. And everyone has a different kind of hard, right? Like your hard might not be the same as someone's hard down the street.
Right.
But whatever their reality is their hard. And so we all go through it together. And I think everyone has a similar experience in hard times. They might feel alone. They might feel abandoned. They don't have very much self-worth, right? We all kind of feel that pressure against us. And then we kind of have this shared human experience of hard things emoting these emotions, right?
Yep.
That just are hard to handle. So we actually named this podcast Like a Diamond, as you know, but because a diamond is made through a very specific process. And for those that don't know, there's a piece of carbon, millions of years old, that's deep within the Earth's surface, and it goes through just immense heat and pressure, probably for thousands of years. And all that heat and pressure compress on that piece of carbon until an extremely hard rock, a diamond, is formed. And what's so interesting, I think, is that when that rock is taken out of the earth, people still don't always know that it's a diamond because it's very ugly. It looks like other types of gems. And it's not until someone that knows what it is begins to cut it and cut it and cut it does the value of a diamond appear, right? And I think it's interesting. I did some research. An average diamond is cut, 50 to 70 different times to create the facets. And then after it's cut, it's got to get polished, right? And because it's not brilliant, it's not shiny. And the only way to polish a diamond is to rub it with an abrasive of other diamonds, because that's the only thing that can make it shine, right? So that process is so emblematic, thematic of how we all struggle through life and how we all experience heat, pressure, pain, and how that pain can make us into something great if we let it. So, does that ring true to you? Does that sound like that can be like a pattern of our life and our difficulties we go through?
If we go back through all of our experiences that we have had just as a couple, we have talked about how our life has been in this cutting phase so much, over and over and over. And I think parts of our life, we are now in the polishing phase. But I think we can all relate in one way or another in all of our experiences that we've been through. So
here we are, right?
Here we are.
So why did we call it Like a Diamond podcast? I think what we're attempting to do is to share our stories of struggle, of pain, of suffering, and what our process was to get through those to the other side, right? And the show is not about us. We're just a mouthpiece of that pain, I guess, right?
Yeah, we want to invite other people to come and sit with us and share their hard experiences, but then also be able to share the pain and suffering, but the joy and how they have been able to become a diamond.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of people on this planet that feel alone. They feel isolated. They feel depressed. They feel not good enough. They don't matter. And then you compound just normal life experiences, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, abuse, um, physical ailments, all those things on top of those feelings you already have. And it's just the pressure keeps building. And in those moments, I know these people across the planet feel like there's no way out. And how do we know that feeling?
We've been there.
We've
We've
been there.
been there so many times, and we want to hear how people have been able to come up and out of it. We want them to share their light and their hope and their love through sharing their stories and their experiences. We want people to know they're not alone.
They're not alone. And I think our hope and our goal for this podcast is if we can just have one story of hope or one person listening or watching feel like, hey, that's like me. And maybe if I just keep enduring or follow a different process, I could become something out of this pain. Right. But before we dive into kind of the meat of this episode and future episodes, Kristen, why don't you tell our audience, our guests, who we are and, just give them some context.
Yeah, we have been married for just over 15 years, and we have 4 children. 2 are biological and 2 are adopted, and we had fostered 8 children total, 2 of which are adopted. We lived in Santa Barbara for 7.5 years, and that's where all of our fostering experience happened. And now we are in Lehi, Utah. We've been here for, gosh, it's almost 8 years that we've been here.
That's crazy.
And Island Park, that's our family happy place. We like to go there every summer and go boating, stay on the water.
We all need an escape from pain, right? And sometimes we bring that pain wherever we escape, but I think we all need an outlet. And that's something we'll talk about in the future of, as part of the process of managing pain. But let me kind of set a format that we hope to follow for future episodes. So as we share our experiences, we're also going to be bringing on guests of people that have experienced different facets of life, different struggles, different pains, different, some of them are extremely crazy experiences that we're excited for people to listen to. But what we really want the audience to hear is how they made it through that. And did they follow a certain process, and how did they not lose hope? And again, we're wanting to showcase that you can make it through hard things and you don't have to lose hope, and there is light at the end of the tunnel.
And you can become something great and amazing at the end of it. That's the
Absolutely.
whole point of being put under the heat and the pressure. So, Andrew, you need to take your glasses off for a second. Look at the
Okay.
camera.
Camera, let's
Zoom in.
camera.
Yes, his right eye actually has a diamond in it. So that is what we are jumping into, is how did that happen? So
Yes, I do have a diamond eye. It's an artificial eye, so we'll go through that story here right now.
the best way to give everyone background of how it all began is to read a letter from your mom. She wrote this several years ago so we could finally get the story straight, right?
Yep.
It's been told.
The fish has gotten a little bigger each time I've told the story, and I was actually on a friend's podcast, and I shared the story, and my mom listened to it, and she was so embarrassed that I had been telling the wrong story for, like, 40 years of my life, or versions of the story that are wrong, so my mom had to set the record straight, and so she emailed me the factual story.
Yes. So bear with me. Every time I read this, I get a little emotional. Here we go. It all began in March of 1983. Andrew woke up with a sore throat one day, and just to be sure, I took him to the HMO to be checked. Our regular doctor was not in that day, so we took whoever was on duty. After diagnosing him with strep throat, she stopped me and said, "Something is wrong with his eye." I said, "Excuse me? Nothing's wrong with his eye. He's just really sick and he's been up all night." I insisted. "Something is wrong with his eye. Must be checked." She proceeded to call the eye doctor who had an office in the same building. He said, "Sure, have her bring him up." My first clue that this was serious should have been how quickly we got into the eye doctor. I just counted myself lucky, seeing as there were several other patients in the waiting room. After examining his eye, well, there's something going on here. It could be a cyst, a growth of some kind, or something else, but I don't have proper equipment to get a look. I'm going to make an appointment with another doctor across town for today. That should have been clue number 2. The doctor so far felt an urgency to have seen us. So I bundled up a very sick 17-month-old and drove 45 minutes to our appointment at another HMO across town. I waited in that doctor's office for what seemed like forever. Finally, after looking at him, he said, "It's obvious this child is too sick to get a good look at his eye. Take him home, get him better, and set an appointment with the specialist." By this time, I had been at one doctor or another for about 5 hours with the son with strep throat. I was furious, and Andrew was miserable, and so was I. 3 weeks passed, and I found myself in the doctor's office with Andrew for his annual well baby check. He looked him over and said everything looked fine. As I was getting him dressed, the doctor asked if I had any questions. I said, "Well, yes, a few weeks ago, the doctor said she thought there was something wrong with his eye. Could you please look at it?" He said, "Sure." He took one look and said, "Yes, there is something going on. I'm going to make an appointment with a specialist at the University of Minnesota Medical Center who specializes in the eye." So this was on a Wednesday. On a Friday, I found a babysitter for Andrew's older brother and drove our only car about an hour to see the specialist. He didn't have the best bedside manner, but I could tell he knew what he was doing. After a lengthy exam by him and a female doctor, I will never forget what happened next. The 2 doctors walked into the room and said, "Mrs. Van Noy, your son has what is called retinoblastoma, which we are sure is 99% cancerous. The only way to treat this is to take his eye out, and surgery is scheduled for next Wednesday." He said this all in one breath. Wow, my world as I knew it had just imploded. I immediately became unplugged. I immediately became unglued. I started bawling. Somehow I was able to tell the doctors what Andrew's father, Paul, work number was, because he had to call him to give him the news. I had only one car, so Paul's boss was kind enough to drive him to the doctor's office. Once my support system walked through the door, I totally lost it. I'll never forget Paul asking, "In this day and age of transplants, I beg you to give our son my eye." The doctor proceeded to tell us that that was impossible. The eye is connected to the optic nerve, which has millions of sensors connected to the brain. There is no way surgically to hook up all those sensors. From that moment on, our little world had been changed forever. We went home and called our families to tell them the news. We asked Paul's side of the family to join us in a fast for Andrew. Our church ward also fasted. On that fast Sunday, I truly felt the Lord's Spirit with us. We had asked our church leader if he would give Andrew a blessing after church. He consented, and we met with him in a room after the meeting. We were about to begin. The church leader turned to Paul and said, "You are his father. You are to give him the blessing." Paul was scared. I'll never forget that as this blessing began, Paul started to say, "Please bless him to be healed." But the church leader gently nudged him and said, "No, start again." Paul started over, and this time he said, "And thy will be done." This was the hardest thing Paul had ever had to do. Never in our young lives had we had to exercise so much faith. Our young son's life was in the Lord's hand. We had to trust him and that he would watch over our son. Tuesday night, we checked Andrew into the hospital for his pre-surgery tests. The nurse fell in love with him. Here, was this little blonde bomber running all over the floor being as cute as ever. To look at him, we wouldn't know that there was anything wrong with him. That night, Paul went home to spend the night with Andrew's older brother and aunt. Surgery was scheduled for early the next morning. I arranged for a cot to be brought into Andrew's room so I could be by him. I laid awake almost the whole night with the scriptures in hand, looking up every scripture available that talked about faith preceding a miracle. I truly believed in modern-day miracles, and never before in my life had I wanted a miracle to happen than with Andrew's eye. I wanted the doctors to go into surgery and find that the tumor was gone and that they wouldn't have to take his eye out, so I fervently prayed all night that I would have enough faith for this miracle to happen. The next day, surgery was scheduled for early in the morning. Paul came back to the hospital as the nurses were getting Andrew ready. It broke our hearts, and when, as they rolled Andrew away on the gurney, he lifted his little arms to us to save him from what was about to happen, I wanted to run to him and take him in my arms and protect him. We immediately went to the hospital to pour our hearts out to the Lord to watch over Andrew and to guide the surgeon's hand. I continued to pray for a miracle. We were in the chapel for a long time, but then we went to the surgical waiting room to wait for the doctor. As the doctor walked in, I asked, "How did it go?" He said it went well. Before he could say anything else, I asked, "Did you have to take his eye out?" He said, "Yes." Well, that is all I heard. I burst into tears and ran out into the hall. I have never felt so dejected and so heartbroken in my life. I didn't have the faith sufficient for this miracle. I had failed Andrew. I couldn't even begin to imagine my adorable little son going through life without his eye. After Paul listened to the doctor's report, he came to console me. I was ever so grateful for his strength during this time. We waited a little while longer, and they finally brought Andrew into his room. Once again, my heart broke as I looked at the big white patch over his right eye and the tubes that seemed to be all over his body. The nurse came into Andrew's room and gently told us that he would be asleep for most of the day and what we really should go home and get some rest. We hesitantly agreed. As soon as we arrived home, knelt in prayer and thanked the Lord for guiding the surgeon's hand and for Andrew coming through surgery okay. As we came back to the hospital and entered Andrew's room, I felt and almost heard an audible voice saying to me, "Everything is going to be okay. Andrew will be okay. This was my will. He will need you more now than ever, but he will be okay." Those words were like a balm to my broken heart. I started crying again, but this time they were tears of joy as I knew my son would be okay. I knew that this road ahead of us would be hard, but we could face it with faith and courage with the Lord beside us. I, as a mother, can't even imagine having to go through something like that. We've had very minor surgeries with our children, and it just brings back all those emotions of having our children being rolled away from us with their arms stretched out and wanting to save them from what they have to go through. So, what does that feel like, hearing those words, and what does it bring back?
Yeah, it's a humbling experience hearing that side of the story that I didn't live, right? I didn't have the blessing and the curse to be a parent of a child in that scenario, and um all I remember, and just in parallel, not to switch stories, but our oldest son, Jackson, was born with, an enlarged heart. He was, an 11 pound.
11-pound, 2-ounce baby,
How long
and
how long was
1
he?
week early.
1 week early. So he was a big boy, right? Um, and I actually remember within minutes of his birth, the nurse checked his blood glucose level and he was low. And so they gave him a bottle of Infamil, right? And just to put a little bit on his lips, and he drank the entire thing within 5 minutes of being alive. And the nurses were freaking out. But he had to go to the NICU, and again, I'm telling you, I'm gonna stay on track, but the story matters to me, um, And he had to go to the NICU, and a day or 2 later, we find out from a cardiologist that he had one side of his heart was larger than the other, so it was beating irregularly.
Yep.
And, I don't know why this doctor, whoever trained him, said that the prognosis was a little bit scarier than what it really was, because we like, kinda lost it. We thought maybe he wasn't gonna live, and or there was gonna be complications with his heart his whole life. And I remember, sitting outside of the NICU, and, I remember this story about my dad and how he was willing to give his eye for me. And, now the tables were full circle where I was sitting outside the NICU, and I had my very first child, my first son, and not knowing more of the details, I was like, "I would give my heart for my son." And I knew what that meant. It knew that I wouldn't be able to live, but that's how much I loved him, and, it brought me a lot closer to my dad in that moment, that he was willing to give an eye to his child and sacrifice something of such value to him so that I might fully see. So I share those experiences because that's how it made me closer to my dad, 40, 30, or I guess 28 years before I had a son. So, it's humbling. It's humbling to hear
Yeah.
that story from my mom.
So as a child growing up, what was it like knowing your eye looked just a little bit different? And were you self-conscious? Did you get treated differently? Just give us a paint a picture of what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that question. Um, as we all know, kids are not, friendly when they see things that are not normal, right? Most kids don't have filters. They say what they see, and, whether someone's overweight or fat or someone looks different or something's wrong, right? They say it. That's just what kids do.
Yes.
And so I grew up, um, having a lot of verbal, things said to me that as a kid I didn't understand. Now, with my fake eye now, um, it looks better because 'cause I've grown and developed, right? But back then, it didn't look very good, and
And also the technology is a lot better
it's so much
today
better
than
today.
it was back then.
Totally, so much better today, but because it didn't look normal, or I had a patch over my eye from multiple surgeries throughout my life, I got made fun of. One of the characters I was referenced as was Sloth from the Goonies, right? And he obviously doesn't look normal. And so growing up, you start painting a picture of yourself based on the echoes of what others say. And so, from an early age, it was a trial to think I was a monster, right? And I had kids that wouldn't want to play with me because I looked weird, right? And that hurt, of course. You can tell there's still emotions because, I've gone through therapy, maybe not fully, but, yeah, no child wants to hear that they're a monster from their peers.
No child should ever have to endure hearing those words.
I agree. And so for me, my worldview, my personal view was shaped by my experience of me losing my eyes as a kid. And, it impacted me in sports. It
How did that impact your dating life?
Yeah, well, as a kid, I mean, I did date, but I always felt like no one was ever gonna like me because I looked like a monster. I mean, that's what kids called me, a monster. And there was one experience that kind of unfortunately was the first stamp of, my interaction with girls and how my eye could impact that interaction. I had got a necklace for a girl that I had a big crush on in elementary school, and I remember it took me days. I brought it to school every day, and it took me days to get up the courage to approach this girl on the playground, and I wanted to, give her something special, and I remember when I gave it to her, she looked at it, and then she threw it, and she said, "Oh, no one can ever like you. You're a monster."
Mm.
What do you do with that? How do you internalize that as a child, right? That the other sex that you are attracted to thinks you're a monster. So, throughout my life, I had confidence issues around girls. It was hard for me to approach them, or I always thought my friends were better looking so they could get girls, and no girls liked me because I looked like a monster, right? And look, there's a lot of people that have a lot things worse than a fake eye, right? But looking back, I understand that. But as a child, you only see the mirror of what people tell you, right? And you believe it. Even though my parents were amazing and they would encourage me and comfort me, the people that I wanted their opinion the most were the ones saying hurtful things, right?
So let's go back just a little bit. Your first surgery was 17, 18 months old. Do you know how many surgeries you had as a child?
I I need to ask my mom. I could probably say 100. I know it's wrong. It's 3, 5, 10. I don't know. It was under 10. It was under probably less than 5. I know one at 17 months old. I think I had one around I was in elementary school. I had one as a teenager, and I had one as like a young adult. So maybe 4 total.
So there's one surgery story that sticks out where you thought you were blind.
Yeah.
I want you to share that.
Oh my gosh. So I go into surgery. I actually don't remember if I think I was a teenager on this one. That's funny. That's my mom would probably correct me on this story, but and she will, but you guys just won't hear that. Um, so I was getting prepped for surgery, and the nurse was a guy, was prepping me, and I remember very distinctly grabbing this big fat marker, and he wrote on my forehead as a teenager, like, "What is that for?" And he said, "Oh, we're letting the doctor know which eye to operate on." That should be pretty obvious. I have a fake eye. Oh, no, it's just procedure because a couple, like, years ago, a doctor in some other state accidentally amputated the wrong appendage. And here I am, like, sitting on the hospital bed, like, yeah, let's write a bigger mark on my forehead, right?" And so that was one of the last things I had remember having conversation with, and then, I had my anesthesia, I go to sleep and I wake up and, I don't know, subconsciously when I woke up out of, anesthesia and my surgeries, I'd rip out my oxygen and I'd kinda rip out my IVs. And so then the bells would start going off and they'd come and I kinda would thrash. I don't know why I just did that. And this time when that happened, I started freaking out because I couldn't see. And I put my hands to my face and I had 2 patches over my eyes. Like, what the heck? So remember, the last thing I hear before I go to, go under is they don't wanna amputate the wrong appendage, and then I wake up and I can't see and I have 2 patches and I am panicked, right? Like, did they cut my wrong eye out? Is this possible? And the nurses said, "Hey, calm down, calm down. Um, when you were in, surgery, your good eye was so relaxed it kept opening, so the doctor put a piece of tape on your eyelid to tape it shut. But when they went to pull it off, it severely scratched your eye somehow." And so I'm like, I can't see, and they're telling me this story, and I'm still freaking out. Like, luckily, I didn't lose my eye, but I literally got wheeled out of that wheelchair with 2 patches on my eyes. And that was my very first experience of being blind. And as you can imagine, having only one eye, going blind is, one of my biggest fears in life, right?
Understandably.
Not being able to see. And so being wheeled out that day blind, essentially, I couldn't see for days, and then when I could start to see, it was only in very dark light 'cause they had to put a lot of drops that would dilate the pupil and just to heal it, and so I remember I can't remember if it was my grandma or someone they were just reading books to me, and, but I had a very empathetic understanding of what blindness means, and I kinda had to face that fear knowing that I would be able to see again, but I understood that darkness, and that kinda has stayed with me my whole life.
So what we've been talking about is a little bit heavy.
Yeah.
With those stories, you have a lot of other
Yeah.
very entertaining and very funny stories, and I want you to start with my favorite one. of how you got out of a speeding ticket
What a face.
by using your fake eye.
Okay, so let me preface, no teenage child or kid or nobody should try to get out of a speeding ticket by lying, right? So I'm gonna make a disclaimer, and for any police authority or attorneys or judges that are listening, um, I have repented, I just never paid a fine for that. Um, but you have to have some fun, right? I've endured a lot through my life, so yes, let's have some fun. So here's the story. I was living in Park City, Utah, and I was driving to a town called Provo, and there's a lake that you have to drive around, and it was pretty late at night, and I had a fast car, and so I was going pretty fast, and I remember distinctly, I mean, I was going pretty fast. I remember distinctly at one moment thinking, if I get a ticket, this is gonna be a whomper, like, it's gonna be bad. Blasting music, windows down. Sure enough, blue and red lights, like, "Oh my gosh, I just willed this into existence." I'm panicked because I know this is gonna be a huge ticket, so I made a quick split-second decision. I was, working with a professor at Brigham Young University that I went to, and her name was, Dr. Ashbaker, and she was um a child, development professor or something, I don't remember. So it had nothing to do with medical, but I called her office line, so it looked like I was on the phone with my doctor, Dr. Ashbaker, and the police officer tapped on the window, had me roll it down, he says, "So do you know how fast you were going?" I was like, "I know, I know, I know. I have to get to the hospital. I'm on the phone with my doctor right now. I lost my eye." And, of course, the police is standing behind the window, and he steps up, and he takes his flashlight and flashes it in, and I'm holding my hand with my eye in my hand, and he shines the flashlight on it and takes a step back. He turns it to me and sees, like, a hole in my head, and he takes another step back. He goes, "Okay, okay," and at this point, I'm actually shaking. My hands are shaking with my eye because 'cause I'm, like, doing something I've never done. And, this cop's like, "Okay, okay, calm down, son, calm down." I'm like, "I'm on the phone with my doctor. I just need to get to the hospital." And the hospital's, like, 25 minutes away still, right? And somehow, in a moment, he became an expert because he goes, "Okay, hold on. Last night, I was watching the Discovery Channel on a show called How It's Made, and there was a segment about how they made fake eyes. We need to get you to the hospital." And I'm like, oh, it it was just hilarious that he was an expert, you know, because of what show he watched, like, the night before. And so, of course, I hadn't thought any of this through, right? None of it. So he goes, "Okay, I'm gonna escort you to the hospital." And I'm like, "Oh, crap. What am I gonna do? He's gonna take me to the hospital." And so, I was like, "No, no, no, no. My doctor says they're waiting for me. I just need to get there as fast as I can so they can put it back in." And again, having not thought this through, I had no answers. If he would have asked, "Well, how'd you lose your eye? How'd the eye pop out?" No idea what I would have told him, right? "Why can't you put it back in?" Didn't think that one through, right? So he said, "Okay, you can't speed that fast, but you gotta get to the hospital. I have a speed trap down the road. I'm gonna radio ahead and tell him not to pull you over, but you can't go over the speed limit." I said, "Okay, okay, that's fine." And he lets me go. And as I roll up the window, my hand's shaking so bad I can't even get my eye in my head because and I start laughing, and I was like, "Did that just happen?" And so I drive past this other cop, and I can remember distinctly. He rolled down his window, and he was like, he wanted to see, 'cause I can't imagine the radio like, "A guy's eye fell out of his head. Please let him go," you know? And he just stared at me as I drove by. And that was my story of how I got out of a very expensive speeding ticket by popping out my eye.
I still actually can't believe that. He's got several stories that I've told him. You can't share those with our kids until they are out of our house because let's not give them.
They're giving me ideas. Yeah, that would not be good.
Yeah, I know. Is there any other funny stories you want to share with everyone? I know it's
Oh, yeah.
popped out during football practice.
Okay, so I'll tell that one. Oh, I was in a football game in high school. I was a running back, and, we were, like, probably, uh, 3rd or 4th down and, like, 11, and the end zone was, like, 12 yards away. So we were about to score, and, I had been going at it with this linebacker all game long. And if you play football, there's a lot of smack talking in the pile sometimes, when you tackle each other. And, he would hit me so hard, and then he'd be on top of me just like talking smack. And then a couple plays later, I would just drill him, and I'd be like, "Yeah, you suck it," right? And towards the end of the game, he hit me so hard. Not only did the snot knock out of me, but my eye popped out. And I kinda woke like, looked up, like, having blacked out for a second, and he was staring straight at me with his eyes wide open, and I was like, "Why are you not talking smack right now?" I go like this, I go, "Oh my gosh, my eye is gone." And he's staring at me like, "I just knocked your eyeball out of your face." And so I'm panicked because you can basically buy a car for how much this eye costs, a small car or an old car. And so I'm panicking. I'm on my hands and knees. And the ref's like, "What are you doing, son?" I was like, I lost my contact. Like, how am I supposed to say I lost my eye, right? And somehow my hands are moving, and right by his foot, I felt it, and he almost stepped, and I grabbed it, and I ran off, and I got a delay of game penalty flag, and I ran off the field, and my coach was like, "Daniel, you bleepity beepity beep, you just cost us 10 yards." And I said, "Coach, my eye popped out." And the entire sideline started laughing, just burst into laughter. And it was the most funny story they had ever heard. They have told it ever since I can, ever since that game. And so I got so hit so hard, my eye popped out with my snot.
With So we've covered some funny, we've covered some hard with bullying and the surgeries and feeling like you were going blind. How has only having one eye impaired you as an adult, or has it impaired you?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it continues to impair me, I think. When I play basketball, even with friends, my older brother knew this. He knew I can't see peripherally, so they would always set like a blind side pick, and I would just run into a wall. And just like, sorry, another story. I'm full of stories. As a kid, my brother used to say, "Hey, Andrew," and I'd turn, he'd poke me in the face because I couldn't see it. Oh, and he'd get so mad, like, "Hey, Andrew," and he'd do it in church all the time, and I'm getting mad in church. And so eventually I started anticipating it. I don't know if my spidey senses started developing, but I remember one day as a teenager, he goes, "Hey, Andrew," and I grabbed his hand. He was like, "Whoa." And I could feel it. I felt it. And I think he had kind of wide eyes, like, and I was like, "Yeah, don't do that again." And so I had to learn to develop senses differently than maybe others just because I didn't have the ability to see. So there's been in sports, even as I'm older, that always plays a problem. But the most common is I'm constantly running into things. I'll run into a door, a cabinet that I forgot I opened. Um, I'll step on something. Oh, it's so frustrating. You know
When your wife is giving you directions in the car and I'm in the passenger seat or in the driver's seat and I'm pointing it which way and I forget you can't see me sitting over there, so
No, I have no idea. I'm just driving, and you're like, "You missed the exit." I'm like, "I didn't know." And you're like, I've been pointing." "Oh, yeah, I can't see."
we're working on those spidey senses,
Yeah,
with your wife.
she's a little further away, that's true. Yeah, and I think other things that have, kind of lasted with me is, I still have confidence issues when I look in the mirror. Like, the only thing I see is what my fake eye looks like. And, even now, I'm 43 years old, every time I look in the mirror, that's what I see first. And I think that will be my scar that I wear the rest of my life, and to remind me of who I've become and what that means to me. But, because it had still had an issue during COVID, we were all a little bored, a little stir crazy, trying to
Oh,
find
yeah.
ways to entertain ourselves. I had an idea, okay, what if I take the components of my camera on my phone and put it into my eye socket? And I did a research, and I started trying to diagram it like an optical zoom, a battery, a gyroscope, or what is that called? The speedometer? I don't know. Whatever, like the functions of the phone in there, not a speedometer, excuse me, I'm not running in my head. But and I wanted to see if I could create a robo eye where I could like zoom in and take pictures of people and stuff. Well, it cost a lot of money. We didn't have that kind of money. You wouldn't probably let me spend that on a fake eye, a fake robo eye. So I said, okay, what's the next best thing? And I was like, oh my gosh, what if I put a diamond in my eye? And so I called my ocularist who'd made fake eyes. I said, okay, if I were to put a diamond in my eye, what would I need to do? And he told me how I would need to cut it. And I went to a jeweler here in Utah, Tresser Jewelers, who I love. And I said, could you cut this diamond specifically? And they're like, I guess there was no diamond cutters in the whole state. So they had to send it to someone in LA, and they cut it. And sure enough, I put this diamond in it. And sorry, another quick story. I know you're sick of those. You get to dress up Friday nights on date night and accessorize cute earrings and necklace. And I always felt like a schlub and just I can accessorize. So I thought that this diamond eye was going to be my Friday night date night eye, right?
Yes.
Like I need this sparkle it up a little bit too, right? And so instead of I was just gonna wear it on special occasions, and I put it on and I looked in the mirror and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." And I've never taken it out since.
No, you thought it was just going to be an every once in a while thing, but it is just your everyday eye.
It's my everyday eye, and here's why it matters. And I know there's a lot of stories about this, but um I was a victim my whole life, victim of cancer, victim of what people said to me, victim of the pain that I felt and the layers of story, the negative self-talk that I told myself that what I was worth and how I was perceived. And when I put this diamond in my eye, I took control back of that story. I was no longer a victim, and it was no longer a weakness or a liability, but it became an asset, and literally an asset to the point where you've been afraid if I got mugged, I would come home with my wallet, but not my eye.
The eye would be gone. Like, that is the most valuable thing on your body.
Yes, not my heart, or my brain, but my diamond eye. And so, but that gave me the power to take that narrative back and say, I am like a diamond. And, phew, and the hard things in my life that I'd been through, and the pain and the struggle, and all the layers of negativity and self-talk, I was worth something, and I was brilliant, and it was important, and I was important. And so now every time I look at myself in the mirror, I see the diamond, and it reminds me of who I really am, what I'm really worth, and why all of that had to happen to me so that I could become the person that I am today. And I'm so grateful for that.
You have talked a lot about just in whether it's a church talk or in conversation, the difference between eyesight and vision. And as you go into and explaining the difference between eyesight and vision for you, share the story of when we lived in Santa Barbara and we were married and stress got too much and you almost went blind.
Yeah.
Literally, your biggest fear almost happened.
It did, yeah, that was probably the most recent story that was kinda scared me. Um,
So what, you think that was 10 years ago? 9 years ago?
yeah, I think maybe
We've been here for 8 years, so it's
yeah,
probably, yeah, a year before we came.
2017, 2016,
Mhm.
2017. So I took, what our son to elementary school, and I remember I had my glasses on, it was a bright morning, and I look up in the sky with my glasses on, I said, "Man, is Armageddon happening? Because the sky looks red or it looks brown, like, it's weird." So I take my glasses off and I look, I'm like, "Wow, that's weird. What's going on?" And so I didn't think much of it, and, actually right across the hall in the building I worked at was an optometrist. So and I knew him a little bit, so I went over there, I said, "Hey, can you just squeeze me in and look at my eye?" And he put me in the chair, and he put his little tool there, and he's like within a second, he said, "Yeah, we need to make a call to the ophthalmologist." "Oh, okay." So their office calls over, is like, "You can see him again today. Let's go in." So I go over there, and, he does his test, he goes, "We need you to go see a retina specialist pretty soon." So I call the retina specialists of California in Santa Barbara, and they're like, we got an opening in like 3 weeks." And I was like, 3 weeks? I think something's really wrong with my eye. I need to get in sooner." And they said, "Well, sorry, that's the soonest time." So I hang up. I call other retina specialists in Los Angeles. I'm trying to find anyone that can see me sooner. And I find someone down kind of the UCLA area, and I go down there, and I remember I had to have my friend drive me because what was happening was, it was getting really blurry in my vision, so I was really afraid to drive 2, 3 hours to LA, and so my friend Zach drove me down there, and when I went to this, retina specialist, he did his test, he goes, "Yeah, you've had a major vessel in your eye rupture, and it's bleeding internally in your eye, and it's compressing on the optic nerve." And what started happening was I got a black spot that started growing bigger and bigger in my vision. And I remember I lost it in his office. He was kind of like didn't have the greatest bedside manner, and he was kind of like abrupt. And then he just saw me lose it, just crying. And I don't think he was expecting that. But again, because my biggest fear is going blind, I just lost it. And so I drove back to Santa Barbara and got a call from the retina specialist and said, "Hey, we actually can see we got a cancellation." So I go in there and get a second opinion, and they confirmed the same thing and said, really, the only treatment option is to give you injections, every week into your eye and to try to, heal the bleeding, and eventually the blood in there will kind of just work its way out. Um,
Was that painful to get injections in your eye?
it wasn't painful, but imagine where you see a sharp needle coming toward your eye and they tell you not to blink.
So not painful, but slightly terrifying?
Yeah, slightly terrifying. So, I mean, really, they put this, like, gel in there, and it completely numbed my eye, so I couldn't feel it, but I remember them holding my eye open with a needle coming in, like, "Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink,"
Uh-huh.
until it went into my eye, and I felt the pressure, and I was like, "Oh," and I'm trying not to blink, my eyes watering, and so I had to do that, every week for months, but the scariest thing was I remember flying from Santa Barbara to San Antonio. We had bought a business for our company down there, and I was in the Denver airport on a layover, and I looked up, and I tried to find my gate. I couldn't see the sign. So I had to turn to the side and try to see it out of my peripheral vision.
That is so scary.
Couldn't see it. And, I remember having to ask for help. I said, "I need you to help me know where this gate is." And that's when I knew it was bad, and tons of fasting, tons of prayer, meditating, and the retina specialist said, "Well, how?" I said, "How did this happen?" And he's like, "We don't know. With your age, they ran blood tests. I went to blood doctors to see if there was any indication, and they said the only thing we can think is that it was stress related." And
There was so much going on in our home, our family life, and then work on top of it. There was a lot of stress, a lot of things going on. But I remember you didn't ever actually tell me how bad or serious it was until a month or 2 later when you were finally feeling a lot better and you saw improvement.
yeah, I was horrified to reveal to you how bad it was, just because I knew that would make me a complete, like, almost useless to you as a husband and a father. And I
Oh, I would've been so scared. I would've been so scared knowing that. Were you going blind, actually?
I remember I was in a local bishopric for our church and our congregation, and I remember light sensitivity made it 10 times worse. And I remember being in our chapel, and the 3 of us were together, and they were talking to me, and how the lights were casting through the window. I literally couldn't see them at all, their face or their body. I couldn't see at all. It was just like a black hole. So, luckily, lots of prayers, medical intervention, the months went by, the black hole continued to shrink, and then I would see bubbles in my eye, air bubbles. And it was the craziest thing, looking around like I'm playing a video game in my head, in my eyeball, because I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna bounce this bubble around." And which was fun and annoying to see a bubble everywhere you looked.
Yeah.
But my eyesight's almost back to normal. I still have some light sensitivity issues. I can tell, like, at night or when there's light, like, it takes a little while to focus, or I see, like, a lingering black spot or a white spot for a little while, then it'll go away, but I've been so blessed that it's mostly gone. I'm grateful I can see. But you asked a question, sorry, I know there's a lot of talking. Again, that taught me a difference between eyesight and vision, and I've always been sight impaired, and people used to call it vision impairment, right? But I learned as a kid, um, seeing is different than having vision. And I think this experience through my life made me realize that having vision, true vision, is seeing things that haven't happened yet, or seeing things that can't be seen with the human eye. And I kind of find that's like one of my superpowers, that I have a vision that most people don't have. And that vision gives me the ability to see beyond struggles, or to see other people's pain and suffering and come run to them. and to create things that haven't been created. And I honestly believe my superpower was because of the life of lack of sight, but the gaining of vision.
And I agree with that because you are a lot more socially aware than most people. And I've seen that time and time and time again.
It's a gift. It's just a spiritual gift, that I've been given. The ability to see things differently than others can see it.
Yep. I want to ask you one more question, but let's reflect back on when you were talking about your dad and how, as your mom had written, your dad would have given his eye for you. Knowing what you know now, if that was medically possible,
Mm.
knowing what you know now, would you let your dad do that for you?
Oh gosh, that's such a loaded question. I honestly say no. And I'm sorry, guys. You're gonna get a lot of crying from me on this podcast. Um, everything that I've become, everything that I am, the person that I am, the husband, the father, the man, is a direct result of the struggles that I've had to go through because of my eye, because of my cancer. And I think as a kid, I would have absolutely yelled at the top of my lungs, "Yes, give me your eye." But as a man, um, aged with wisdom, I guess, I absolutely would never ever trade that trial for what I've become and what I've gained. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for sharing your story, becoming vulnerable, allowing yourself to cry and open up. I know some of those stories are hard to relive.
Yeah,
So thank you for sharing all of that with us.
you're welcome, and thanks for listening. I don't know if anyone will have some, anything that they can connect with that story, but I want people. How is that my story like a diamond? One, literally, I have a diamond in my eye, right? But two, um, heat and pressure, and then constant cutting, and then polishing has made me the man that I am. And I promise, whatever trial you're going through, whatever pain you're enduring right now, you might not be able to see it, but just trust me. Keep going, allow the cutting to happen, and someday you also will be like a diamond.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Join us next week as you will hear a very different cancer story. A friend of ours who lost his father and then later in life lost his wife to cancer, and to hear how his process has allowed him to become like a diamond, something bright and something beautiful.